Okay, well, are you ready to start? I don't know about the others, but at least we can start. So today we're going to discuss sociolinguistic competence. What do you know, or what can you imagine about this competence? What is it that it deals with? What is it that we need to help our students develop, right? What do you think? Just for the name of it. Just from the name of it. Good morning, Flor.
Sorry, I don't know why Petco doesn't admit my password. I have to change it.
Oh, okay. Maybe you can write to the support webpage that is on the first page of Petco. Or write to Emilio. Emilio or Matias are the ones in charge of this. So let's think about how the word sociolinguistic is made up, right? It has social-linguistic, right? What is it, or how is it that we are going to see language, right? And we have something in the chat. I didn't see. So up to now, you have discussed grammatical competence with Silvina, right? What is it that grammatical competence deals with?
It deals with how words work and how to construct grammatical structures.
Okay.
All of that.
Good. So it has to do with the rules. Give me a second. Well, something happened, but I don't know what it was. Sorry. So when we think about, or when we deal with grammatical competence, we need to take into account the rules in the language that make it grammatically correct, let's say, right? With Silvina, you also studied different ways to approach this grammatical competence when you discussed, for example, focus on form or focus on forms, right? Different ways to study the language, right? Focus on form deals more with, well, maybe you can tell me, do you remember? What is the difference between focus on form and focus on forms?
Focus on forms has to do with more or less a structural approach where
Okay.
the students need to complete, I don't know, the simple present form.
Okay.
And the focus on form, it is important to have a context in which the students can derive the use and the meaning of the
Okay, very good.
grammar.
So it is not only the linguistic items isolated, okay, that is focus on forms, right? We analyze every piece, let's say, of the language, right? And in focus on form, we take into account how language appears in context, right? That is the main difference, okay? Well, in this case, we are going to continue studying the language, but in relation to the usage, right? That's why it has this social part, right? It has to do with how language is used and the meanings intended when we are communicating different ideas, okay? So let's have a look at one a definition, right? So as we said before, it includes both sociocultural rules of use and rules of discourse, right? So we need to take into account what happens in a specific culture, right? When people use the language, right? And then also the rules of discourse. Discourse in the sense that it is not only isolated bits of language, but what it is that we mean to say, the functions that we use when we use certain language, okay? So Sut describes sociocultural competence as the student's ability to accomplish proper cross-cultural communication. So this might be like our aim, right? To master communication, to be able to communicate across cultures, right? This competence is very closely related to intercultural competence, which is another competence that we're going to discuss after winter holidays, okay? We are going to see why they are so closely related, but maybe with what we discussed today, you will also guess why or see why. Okay, another thing that we need to take into account is what Canales says. To be able to master social-linguistic, competence, it has to do with how we understand and how properly we use language, right? He says that the extent to which utterances are produced and understood appropriately in different social-linguistic contexts, depending on contextual factors. In this case, the contextual factor is not only the text in which the language appears, but also the situation, okay? It is not only sometimes the utterance, sometimes it is also, it is accompanied by gestures, right? By intonation that might give the words we use, the utterances that we say, a slightly different meaning, right? So we need to start paying attention to appropriateness of utterances in general. Now we're going to see two different types of appropriateness, okay? And these types of appropriateness are the ones that should help us as teachers, right? To think about what it is that we have to teach our students about a specific language, either item or function, right? So we need to start thinking about appropriateness of meaning, which concerns the extent to which particular communicative functions, attitudes, and ideas are proper in a given situation. So you see, now we need to start looking at the meaning that we want to convey for a specific situation, right? The language that we're going to use in that situation. That's why it says the communicative functions. What are the communicative functions? Good morning, Rocio. We are talking about social-linguistic competence, okay? We have, well, I have already said that it is related to the language that we use, but we are focusing in this case, or the aspect that it deals with, is exactly the relationship, or not the relationship, the language in use in a specific situation, right? And also in a specific sociocultural context, right? Sometimes it has to do with cultural awareness, and sometimes it has to do with a specific situation, right? So the utterances that are used in any given context, these two ideas that we are discussing now are things that we as teachers need to take into account in order to see if there is appropriateness, right? If the language that we use is appropriate for a specific context, for a specific situation, okay? And as we are teaching a language that is not our own, right? We need to check and be careful with how we teach it. With, for example, what functions we give or we teach about a specific form of the language. Okay, now we are going to see that, you will have to work with that more in detail to see all the process, so that you have to take into account in order to later on design your lessons, right? So one of the things that we are concerned when we think about sociolinguistic competence is the extent to which a communicative function, I was going to ask if you know what a communicative function is. What do we mean by a function in language?
Isn't it language that we use for specific purposes or contexts?
Yes, for example?
For example, the bits of language you use to, I don't know, to describe your daily routine. I wake up, I get up, I brush my teeth.
Very good. For example, greetings. For example, I don't know, asking about the price things have.
Yes, booking plane tickets, booking bus tickets.
Yes, that is the function. Of course, that is not the language we need to use. That is only what I need to do with the language, right? Then, even for one function, I might have more than one way, or more than one expression, let's say, in the language for the same function, right? So we need to help our students be aware that sometimes that function might be communicated by different expressions, right? And then we will also have to take into account not only appropriateness of meaning, right? If the meaning in the functions and language I choose is okay for a specific situation, but also the appropriateness of form, okay? So in this case, we're going to take into account if a given meaning is represented in a verbal and or non-verbal form that is proper in a given context. And this is very closely related to register, okay? To the difference in the situation in which we have, I don't know, formal language, informal language, right? How we, I don't know, address different people, whether we know them or not, taking into account the situation, right? So these two things are the ones that we have to help our students to achieve, right? Appropriateness of meaning and appropriateness of form. Let's suppose that there is a student who can make very correctly grammatical sentences, let's say, but he uses them in a context which is not right, okay? Sometimes we see that in Argentina when other people want to learn Spanish, right? And they use words that are not the correct words for the situation, right? Can you think of any example?
I don't think my examples are appropriate.
Well, maybe not, better not to mention them. But for example, I find it sometimes, I don't know if funny is the word, but it is like cute when a foreign speaker tries to incorporate language that we use, like, I don't know, expressions that are very typical of Argentinians, right? And might not be essential in the idea that this person wants to communicate, right? But I don't know, now I can't think any word. But well, sometimes when I will say boludo, right? When they use the word in a conversation, sometimes they don't use it correctly, right? Sometimes, well, sometimes my son uses words that he doesn't know the meaning of, but he takes them from YouTube videos or from games, video games, right? And when he uses them, they are like out of context, right? They don't work in the same way. So this is one of the things that we need to take into account. And now we are going to try to see what the problem is in each of these situations. These are two best man speeches. Do you know what that is? They are two different weddings, right? And these men, I don't know if you have watched the film. Have you watched it? 4 Weddings and a Funeral. Yes? Maybe you have read the reader.
Yes.
We were in first year.
Both.
Both, okay. So these two parts of the film have or present different problems that are related to appropriateness of meaning and appropriateness of form. So after we watch these videos, I want you to tell me what you think the problem was, okay? Give me a second. I always forget to click for you to hear the sound. Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry to drag you from your delicious desserts. There are just one or two little things I feel I should say as best man. This is only the second time I've ever been a best man. I hope I did the job all right that time. The couple in question are at least still talking to me. Unfortunately, they're not actually talking to each other. The divorce came through a couple of months ago. But I'm assured it had absolutely nothing to do with me. Apparently, Paula knew that Piers had slept with her younger sister before I mentioned it in the speech. The fact that he'd slept with her mother came as a surprise, but I think was incidental to the nightmare of recrimination and violence that became their 2-day marriage. Anyway, enough of that. My job today is to talk about Angus, and there are no skeletons in his cupboard. Or so I thought. I'll come on to that in a minute. I would just like to say this. I am, as ever, in bewildered awe of anyone who makes this kind of commitment that Angus and Laura have made today. I know I couldn't do it, and I think it's wonderful they can. So anyway, back to Angus and those sheep. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you'd raise your glasses, the adorable couple.
Okay. Give me a second.
Pray silence for the best man.
When Bernard told me he was getting engaged to Lydia, I congratulated him because all his other girlfriends had been such complete dogs. Although, may I say how delighted we are to have so many of them here this evening. I'm particularly delighted to see Camilla, who many of you will probably remember as the first person Bernard asked to marry him. If I remember rightly, she told him to sod off. And lucky for Lydia that she did.
It's very disappointing.
Okay. So I'll go back to what we were discussing. So what could you see in these two videos? Was there appropriateness of meaning? Was there appropriateness of form? Do you think they were being serious about what they said, or were they saying those things just to be funny?
They both used sarcasm to convey their meanings, but I think there was appropriateness of meaning in the two videos, but I think the form was not all that correct.
Okay, okay. Was all the meaning correct? I mean, were the choice of words they used, was that always correct for that situation, right?
I believe so for the first video, but I don't think so for the second. I think in the second it started okay, but then it got worse.
Okay, okay. Can you give any examples? Would you like to see them again? Yes? Let's see if you can, I don't know, notice something in the language they use that was not appropriate in either each of these ways, right? Meaning or form.
Mary, Belén
Yes.
Cartier is saying she's unable to enter. She cannot make the link nor the information work, the ID and the password.
Maybe I can
she's-
give you, wait a second. I'll give you the information here again in the chat. Maybe you can send it to her.
Okay.
I don't know why, because you could be here. Ah, I sent it to Flor only. Sorry. That is the link. And if you want, I can copy. No, it doesn't let me. Give me a second. And there you have the information. Okay, I'll go back. So let's watch the videos again to see if you can spot anything in the language that you think is not appropriate, either because of form or meaning, right, in these situations.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry to drag you from your delicious desserts. There are just one or two little things I feel I should say as best man. This is only the second time I've ever been a best man. I hope I did the job all right that time. The couple in question are at least still talking to me. Unfortunately, they're not actually talking to each other. The divorce came through a couple of months ago. But I'm assured it had absolutely nothing to do with me. Apparently, Paula knew that Piers had slept with her younger sister before I mentioned it in the speech. The fact that he'd slept with her mother came as a surprise, but I think was incidental to the nightmare of recrimination and violence that became their two-day marriage. Anyway, enough of that. My job today is to talk about Angus, and there are no skeletons in his cupboard. Or so I thought. I'll come on to that in a minute. I would just like to say this. I am, as ever, in bewildered awe of anyone who makes this kind of commitment that Angus and Laura have made today. I know I couldn't do it, and I think it's wonderful they can. So anyway, back to Angus and those sheep. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you'd raise your glasses, the adorable couple. Yes.
Okay, let's stop here and discuss what you saw. What could you see?
I think it is proper in both ways. It is proper in meaning and in form. And meaning in the sense that he is given a speech that is, I don't know, normal to that situation of a wedding. And on form is appropriate because everyone understands the jokes. So it is, he is in the same register, let's say, with the audience.
Do you think everything he said was planned like that? Or did he include information that maybe he should have made?
That was what I was, well, mucho was. That was what I was going to say. He started pretty well, but then he realized that the audience didn't feel quite, let's say, comfortable with parts of the speech, and so he switched topics so that people don't get awkward.
Okay, he sort of tried to fix what he was saying, but in the end, he made it worse because the information.
Especially when he mentions the violence and the short marriage, the short period.
Yes, and sleeping with the mother of his wife.
Well, I think that the jokes about the mother and the sister-in-law, I think they were like lighthearted. People laughed.
Okay. Yes, of course.
But when he
can't do anything else. Imagine if there was, well, most probably there were people there who didn't know about those things. So, I mean, for a best man speech, it is not the most usual thing to say, right? What happened to the couple that got married before, right? That's why there is something in the appropriateness of meaning that is not completely right. For example, what he said about what he thought about marriage, that is what you expect to hear in a best man speech. Probably not the other things, right? Maybe the joke with Angus and the sheep, right? Because sometimes there are jokes in a best man speech, but all the same, all the other information about the other couple that maybe probably was also there was not really appropriate, right? Even when the audience was laughing. Okay. And what about the form? Was the language he used okay? Was it formal for that context? I mean, that is a formal context, right? Probably it was, right? His words, his choice of words was not wrong, right? And in the other case, let's have a look at it again.
Praise silence for the best man.
When Bernard told me he was getting engaged to Lydia, I congratulated him because all his other girlfriends had been such complete dogs. Although, may I say how delighted we are to have so many of them here this evening. I'm particularly delighted to see Camilla, who many of you will probably remember as the first person Bernard asked to marry him. If I remember rightly, she told him to sod off. And lucky for Lydia that she did.
It's very disappointing.
Okay. So what about this situation? Hello, Belen, you could enter. You could join us. What about appropriateness of meaning? Were the functions, attitudes, and ideas proper for this situation, for this context?
No, I think it's improper.
Okay. What thing in particular? Can you give an example?
Yes, when the very second sentence of his speech, when he talks about other girlfriends, I mean, that's unnecessary. And then when he gives one clear example, like the first girlfriend or something like that, that was highly unnecessary and unwelcomed by the guests.
Yes, because the girl was also there at the party. Good. What about appropriateness of form? What was the language he used like? Was it appropriate? I don't know if you...
It was.
Okay.
Well, I think it was. I don't know what the other thing.
He used some bad words also when he said that his first girlfriend or the first girl he asked to marry said or told him to sort off. That is not also appropriate for a best man speech. Okay. Belen, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay.
I couldn't enter. I mean, the link wasn't valid.
Yes, I don't know what happened. We are discussing sociocultural competence, sociolinguistic, Michael. Okay, sociolinguistic competence. And we talked about what it is that we need to take into account about the language so that our students master sociolinguistic competence. Okay, so we talked about these two characteristics for appropriate utterances. Okay, appropriateness of meaning, always in relationship with a specific situation, right? That is why it is called social-linguistic competence, because we need to take into account the pragmatic aspect of language, right? Language in use, okay? That's why the situation in which we use the language is so important. And then appropriateness of form has to do with the language that we use or that we choose, again, for a specific context, and that has very frequently to do with the register, with the situation, with politeness also, right? Okay. So let's continue. Well, goes back. Okay. Now we are going to see some rules that we need to take into account to consider how effectively a given communicative function is conveyed and interpreted, right? Not only our choice of the language that we need to use, but also how the other person interprets that, right? Okay, so let's start reading about these rules, okay? And now you are going to work with these rules and something in particular, okay? So these are rules that we can use or we can take into account so as to check if the language we have chosen has the appropriateness of form and meaning, right? For example, the pragmatic rules have to do with the situational preconditions that must be satisfied to carry out a given communicative function. That is to say, if the people involved in that situation share the same knowledge, understand the language that we choose to use is correct for that particular in exchange of ideas, right? That has to do with the use, right? Then social appropriateness rules, whether or not a given function would normally be conveyed at all, and if so, with how much directedness. So let's suppose that, I don't know, I have to teach, study the function of greetings, right? Any function. There are some expressions and there is language that is appropriate for greetings and some other that is not, right? And sometimes I can greet someone even when I don't use the most frequent words or expressions, right? So that is why here it refers to this as with how much directedness, because sometimes we, in a text or when we speak, we use language that is we use a different meaning of the words we choose, let's say. For example, when we use metaphors, when we are being ironic, right? So sometimes it's not that I can't understand the words, the language that is spoken, right? But I don't understand the meaning in that context, okay? And then we also have linguistic realization rules. And these involve different things. One, for example, the frequency with which a grammatical form is used to convey a given function. Sometimes, as we have said before, one grammatical form might express more than one function, right? Or a function might have many different either grammatical ways or expressions, right? To express or with the same function, let's say. So we need to be careful that we choose the functions and the language for those functions that are most typical in the language that we are teaching, right? Not the exceptions, not the exceptional uses, right? That is one thing. Then another thing is the number and structural range of forms associated with each function. We need to let our students know that that might not be the only way to express likes and dislikes, for example, right? To express, I don't know, buying things, okay? There are usually more than one way to do that, more than one way of using the language for that. And then also we need to take into account the generality of forms and situations, right? All the variety that exists, and the means of modulating the attitudinal tone of a given function. The attitudinal tone is closely related to pronunciation, right? In diction and in phonetics, you have studied that depending on the tone that we use, we might give exactly the same sentence a different meaning, right? And it happens to us in Spanish too, right? I can say, ¿cómo estás? ¿Cómo estás? Right? And we, by changing the intonation, we also change the meaning or the intention of the message that we are trying to convey, okay? So we are going to take these rules into account, but now you're going to work with a Jamboard that I am going to share with you in a minute, in which I will ask you to, how many are you now? You are 6, okay. So I will divide you in pairs, right? In breakout rooms, and each of you will take one of the slides, okay? I will show you what you will see on the slides first. So, what you will see is this. On one slide, you will have some language items, right? And you will have to think about what functions are associated to those language items, if there are any other ways in which we can express the same functions, right? If you think there might be difficulties for us as language teachers of Spanish students, right? So in the relationship between, or the comparison between Spanish and English, right? So for example, here you have this, that, these, those. On the other slide, you have how much or how many. There is, there are, I'd like, and can I. Okay, so each pair will choose one of the slides. And on the last slide, you have here the rules that you have to take into account, right? To see, for example, if, especially I would say the linguistic realization rules, right? The frequency with which that grammatical item is used for that function, right? If there are any others, right? If you think there is anything specific about the intonation that we give to any of these expressions, right? And let's see, I think I'm forgetting something. Let me check.
Sorry?
Yes.
I want to work with him if I can.
Sorry, I couldn't hear.
But I want to work with him if I can.
Ah, okay, okay. I'll try to put it together. Do you want to choose? Do the rest want to choose too?
Flor, how are you? Good morning. Wake up, honey. Shall we do it together?
Okay.
Okay, Flor and Rocio. And Ashelén and Belén, okay? So you need to focus on what communicative functions you would have to teach for each of these language items, and if they are similar or different to the language forms that we use in our culture, okay? Experience in what it is that we need to think about, right? So who would like to start? You have chosen can I'd like, and how much and how many. I will give you an example of something that might happen, right? With one of the things that you haven't chosen. Let's take there is and there are. When do we use there is and there are? To express what?
To express existence.
Okay, but can you give me a more concrete situation, for example?
When we want to describe, I don't know, furniture in a house.
Okay, yes. Mm-hmm.
Or to express a quantity.
To express quantity also in what situation?
To say, for example, how many students are in a classroom.
Okay.
So you say there are 25 students.
Any other situation in which we use there is and there are?
To describe a place or the
Okay.
objects that are in a specific place.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes, to describe a place, to describe a room, as Rosia said. What
The food
about
you
when we
have in your
sorry, Flor, again?
food you have in your fridge.
The food, very good, that you have in your fridge, okay? How do we say there is and there are in Spanish?
I.
Yes, Rocio, you were saying it mutely. Yes, it means I, and there is no difference for us if the nouns are countable or uncountable, okay? That is a huge difference because that is
Also,
something.
quantity. Here in English, we have a distinction for plural and singular things, and in Spanish, we don't.
Yes, exactly, okay? So that is something that we need to take into account because that concept is different from our language, right? That is why we need to think about all the possibilities to express the same functions, all the language for one function, right? And then also about the differences or the difficulties that might bring for a different cultural context, right? For a different language. Give me a second. I'm sorry. That was my child. Okay, who would like to tell us what you have been doing? Which group? We have how much, how many. We have I'd like and can I. Who would like to start? Or shall I read it? I don't know. How do you want to go about it?
Maybe you can choose because they are not going to start and I always start
Okay.
discussions.
Okay, I choose. Well, let's start with this one, okay? So, can I? Communicative function asking for permission and request. Do you agree? Yes, very good.
Yes.
So, is that the only function for this language form?
No.
I would add ability.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's also.
We were thinking about that. We were thinking about that, but then when we saw can I specifically, it was weird to say to oneself if one can do something. Can I
Exactly.
swim? Oh yes, I can swim.
It's not
I
that
don't know.
it is not right, but generally these are things you wonder, you think about, right? The concept is generally not spoken. You very, I don't know, you don't think about, you don't say this aloud very frequently. Can I do this? Okay. My daughter was looking for the nanny. Okay, so let's see the rules. What have you done here? You try to analyze each of the rules in isolation, right? That is what you try to do?
Yes.
Okay, so pragmatic, informal context, okay, do you all agree?
We wrote that because there are other ways to ask for permission and request. So
Yes.
maybe this can be considered an informal function.
Yes, either informal or at least neutral, right? It is not the most formal way to ask for permission or
Right.
a request, right? But it is okay, very good. And then social appropriateness, it is normally used to ask for permission, okay? So probably it would, I mean, if we think about what would not be correct, right? Would be to tell my sister, would you be so kind of giving me the book? I don't need to ask my sister that, right? Probably if it is a person I don't know or a person I usually treat with more respect than others because our relationship is not so close, I would choose to use those forms, right? You have it there. Would you mind if, okay? So
There's
that
an
is,
amazing expression or way of asking, and it's could you please be so kind as to, and then you ask the
of
question.
course, that's another way. So the idea is to
I'm sorry.
let, yes.
I was thinking of a similar expression for can I, and I thought of shall I. Like, shall I open the window?
Okay,
Shall I?
yes, that's another possibility. Yes, you're in that case, you're offering yourself to do something. You're not asking. It might be used in the same situations, right? But it's not the same if I say, can I open the window? I'm expecting the other person to say yes or no. But if I say, shall I open the window? Probably you're offering, well, in both cases.
Yeah, no, I can see because here the girls said that it's useful for asking for permission. So if you say, can I open the window? It's like, am I allowed to open the window? I'm not
Yes,
the idea of shall,
also. Yes.
because shall is like, I will open the window. Are you okay with that? That's the meaning of shall.
I mean, they are very similar in meaning, and it is true that they are used for the same functions, okay? And then linguistic realization, they wrote frequently used in informal contexts, yes. Other forms associated, would you mind or could you be so kind, as you said, you see. Probably when we teach, and depending on the on the language level of our students, sometimes we choose one form and not others, right? But in order to develop social linguistic competence, our students at some point will need to know that there is more than one way of asking for permission and making a request, okay? And also the situations, that is something I sent you a message to the breakout rooms. I don't know if you saw it, but saying that you might, or it might help you think about what situations in real life are the ones in which these language forms appear or are appropriate, okay? Because social linguistic competence also has to do with the situation, right? Let's see another one. I'd like. Communicative function, this phrase is used to ask for something politely, okay? So no, preconditions to unknown people in a formal context. For example, what would you ask for?
There you have the examples in blue.
Here, ordering food in a restaurant, buying clothes, ordering coffee in a shop. Okay, very good. Social appropriateness, it's neutral in that it isn't a direct request. Okay. Yes, it is neutral. I mean, I think in any context, a formal or an informal context, you can say, I'd like, right? Good. For each of these situations, probably you will need to, I mean, every time you have to teach I'd like, you will need to choose one of these contexts, but also show the students that there are other contexts in which this expression can occur, okay? Difficulties in L2, learners, pronunciation of sound, very good, in I'd, recognition of the auxiliary would in I'd. Yes, that might be a difficulty, very good. English, Spanish differences, there isn't a short form to express the idea, and most probably would say quiero, dame, me gustaría, etc.
Actually, in the would is synthesized, let's say, in el ia. Me gustaría, querría.
Yes. But it is true that in Spanish, well, we do have a difference in context, right? In register. If you say me gustaría, it's usually more polite than quiero.
Right. We discussed that with Flor, and she told me that she never used me gustaría in Spanish to ask for or in the context that we exemplified.
Okay.
For example, when she's at a restaurant. Sorry?
Quisiera? What about
I don't
quisiera?
know, do you use quisiera?
Yes, I think that can be. I don't remember, but
well, you see that we need to start paying attention to those things, right? Because those things will guarantee that our students are better speakers of the L2, let's say. If we take the differences into account, if we take the situations into account, the frequency with which one expression is used in a given situation, right? Okay. And well, these are things you might ask yourself, right? If you really say those things in Spanish or not, okay? Or maybe not if you say them, because you might have your own ways of expressing yourself, but if they are frequent expressions in our language, right? And let's see the other one. How much and how many, the function is to quantify and ask about quantity of objects and entities, okay? How much for uncountable nouns, how many for countable nouns. Other ways, you can say a lot of, or lots of, some, a few. I mean, there are many expressions to speak about quantity, right?
Yeah,
Probably
we have
when,
a lot of problems trying to find ways of asking for
okay,
how much and
yes,
how many. But saying
that
yes,
is what
a
was
lot, a bunch, a handful. In those cases, there are a lot of examples.
Yes, I was going to say that. Yes, very good. Okay, and then difficulties for L2 learners, difficulty to differentiate between countable and uncountable nouns, and consequently mixing them up. Good. Students might misunderstand when they need to use much and when many. Yes, probably because of the same reasons also, right? Because of countable and uncountable nouns. Because for us in Spanish, how do we say how much and how many? Yes,
¿Cuánto,
Rocío, you're muted
cuánta,
again.
cuántas y cuántos?
Yes, cuánto, cuántas, cuántos, right? But those differences don't have to do with countable and uncountable nouns, right? So there we have
And
another.
going a step further, including I don't want to put my foot in it, but taking into consideration the inclusive language, we can even say cuantes.
Yes.
Aren't we?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So there's another way of asking as well.
Yes.
A third one.
That's right. And then, well, going to see the supermarket, these are the situations in which we might use this: asking for money, organizing a party. I read something about the residencias.
That was Jiménez's example.
Well, but it's true, right? It's true.
You were
very
meant
good.
to read that.
Well, but it's a Jamboard. We are sharing, no problem. Okay, so let's go back to our presentation a little bit. We are about to finish, and Silvina would like to join us. Let me let her know. Okay, here we are. So, let's see. From what you have been doing, now you see that it is not so easy sometimes what to choose and how to teach what we need to teach. For example, for the teaching practice, you might be given, either a topic, the jungle, I don't know, the planets, the solar system, right? Or a grammatical item, like there is and there are. Okay, so in both cases, I need to check. If you get the topic, you will need to check what language it is that we need to teach to speak about that topic, what tense, what expressions, what functions are expressed, right? And then if I get a grammatical item, I need to do the opposite. I need to think about the functions, the situations, right? So some strategies that you can take into account to help your students are making pragmatic features explicit. This means to make explicit the functions of each of the language forms that you are teaching, right? What situations or in which situations this language will appear, right? Promoting oral and written discourse, because sometimes we get different functions in each of these types of discourses. So types of discourse, right? Silvina is here to join us. And then also raising awareness so that students can interpret the surrounding environment, right? especially when we need to think about another culture, not only our own, right? Sometimes social appropriateness rules are not the same in one country and another, right? That's our politeness rules, let's say.
For example, I learned the very first years at university that asking what in English is very impolite. And
That's
in
right.
Spanish, it's super useful and common. I mean, we always say,
Yeah.
¿qué? Cuando no entendemos, what? And so I remember I kept saying what to Maggie Sincraft, and she almost killed me because every day in class she told me, you can't say what, say sorry, say pardon, say anything else, but don't say what. People will get offended.
That's right. Very good example. Very good example, Ro. Okay, so I wanted to show you something before we finish. Here you have the link to a PDF by a teacher. She's called Sandra Lee McKay, and she tries to develop social linguistic competence by implementing different lesson plans with drama techniques. Drama techniques allow us, or might allow us, to include the situational part, right? Putting our students into context in a given situation and thinking about the language they would have to use. And she works with a script as a text, right? And she works with predicting the script, predicting the language that might appear in a given situation, rethinking the script by asking the students to analyze if the language used is correct for those situations presented in the story, and then rewriting the script if there is something that can be said better in a different way. I thought it was like a good idea, right? It is usually very difficult, especially when we have to recreate or make the conditions seem similar to the situations in another country that is not our own, right?
It's an original approach, because I have here one of the books I work with at an institute, and it has a section that's called something like spoken, something, well, I don't quite remember, but it's like you have a conversation, practical English, it says.
Okay.
And in this case, for example, it says asking for information about careers, future careers. But then you have the conversation and there's nothing else. I mean, they have to fill in blanks, they have to listen to a recording and complete the conversation. But then there's nothing to put into practice.
Okay, and there is probably no analysis of that,
right,
of the language that appears in those situations.
And most importantly, there isn't an instance for students to practice or to come up with their own ideas, which is the most important part, to put the language in practice.
Yes, true.